stacker of wheat, player with railroads, and the nation's freight handler. Stormy, husky, brawling, city of big shoulders. That's Carl Sandburg's classic description of Chicago, first published in March 1914, 100 years ago. And while a lot of it still rings true, the Chicago of today is aiming for a different role in the world. And one of the guys at the forefront of that movement is with us now.
I expect to be a major part of the mayor's initiative, which is to create 20 to 30,000 new jobs in the technology sector in the next decade.
It's a man who Inc. magazine once called the most accomplished, best-connected entrepreneur you've never heard of. Howard Tullman. He's the CEO of 1871 in Chicago, and our guest for this edition of Panorama on Rivet. Coming to you now from 1871 itself on the 12th floor of the historic Merchandise Mart. Welcome to Panorama.
Happy to be here.
What's it like leading an organization whose name is a number? In the old days, I'd wonder, how do people find you in the phone book? Are there any challenges that go with that name, 1871?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is that you have to perpetually explain where it came from, and the second largest challenge is the vast number of people who go to the 18th floor of the Merchandise Mart looking for us.
Before we get to what 1871 is and what it's up to, I want to back up. Your resume is so dazzlingly complex. I'm afraid to try to condense it myself, and you have far more experience at this than I do. So tell us the story. You started out professionally, as I understand it, as a lawyer.
As a trial lawyer.
That's correct. Take us from there to
here. So it's actually pretty rational. It's driven by three things. One, I can't keep a day job. There's no question about that. Two, I like to build more than I like to manage. And three, I've been just blessed to be able to explore so many different, vertical industries over the last 50 years. So 10 years as a lawyer, but interestingly enough, divided into 5 years where I managed very large-scale class actions and really invented some of the technology around that. And then the next 5 years where I managed and invented, again, systems for Chapter 11 proceedings. The Chapter 11 today is a pretty well-known commodity. In 1975, when I was doing it for the first time, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure had first been applied to the bankruptcy court in that year. And that changed bankruptcy from repossessing somebody's refrigerators to tools that folks like Chase Manhattan Bank would use to renegotiate and re-envision multi-billion-dollar real estate deals. And so we really built all of the systems and all of the law around that. And long story short, by about 10 years in, it turned out that the information technology opportunities to me were more interesting and more recurring and regular than being a lawyer and wondering every single day whether the judge woke up that morning and whether his breakfast meal would impact the likely success of my litigation. So at the end of that first decade, I basically retired from the legal practice and started the first of a series of very large-scale information businesses that became public companies and that lasted for the next 10 years or so, and that period was basically around insurance, automotive, customer satisfaction, and all of these had, to me, this is funny, the resume looks like a perpetual, travelogue, but the fact is that, the next 10 years were single-minded in the sense that the focus was to create opportunities around the idea that information that's brought to real time is worth 10 times or 100 times more than historic information. So for example, the insurance industry, what that meant was instead of Allstate or State Farm evaluating a vehicle based on some book that was published 4 times a year and the numbers who knew where they came from, we built a real-time database of 6,000 car dealers distributed across the entire United States, and we came to be, and this is 40 years later, it's still up and operating, essentially the people who now tell every major insurance company in the country, what to pay for a car that's lost or stolen or just, destroyed to a certain extent. And that information went from a book that you could buy for $22 a year for subscriptions to $35 per transaction, and made a business that, on average in a good year made $300-400 million. So that model, we then moved to measuring customer satisfaction. So J.D. Powers, okay? But J.D. Powers had the exact same problem. He wasn't a book, but he would wait 6 months and then send you $1 and a questionnaire and say, how was your experience? And frankly, if you remembered it at all, it was because you were angry. Nobody happy said, why don't I take some time out of my day and take a few pictures with my car or something. So we built, again, a system to acquire real-time information, talk to millions, literally 13 million calls a year, talk to real customers within 24 to 48 hours of an experience. And the experience could be a car purchase, a restaurant, you name it. We did virtually everything. We didn't do hotels. It turned out you didn't want to be calling anybody's home and asking how his night was last night at some hotel in a different city.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Well, and that's
so that was way through. Yeah, so that was 10 years, call it 80 to 90.
Okay.
And then came along the web, and so I started to build all of the databases that today we would call Monster, that we would call Cars.com, that we would call Tunes. So I literally built the first employment job database. Built the first real estate tracking, database, the first resume, database, and we built a series of those, and those all became the forerunners for this idea that you would now have huge aggregations of data in these various interesting ways. So that was the early 90s. And then I took a complete right turn and said, I'd like to develop and design computer games. So I had a different take on it. Half of my games were educational, so I partnered with Waldo, for example. Where's Waldo? Martin Hansford.
Did they ever find him?
No, and I know where he is. I have a picture of me standing next to a sort of a grown-up actor, so I often use it and say, I do know where Waldo is, so you should definitely listen to me. But, and then I did another group that were Hollywood movies, where I did extensions that were these computer games. So Arnold Schwarzenegger and Tommy Lee Jones and Jeff Bridges, all these guys were people that I worked with to produce movies, but they were mini movies because they became part of these games. Mid-1990s, Intel and Microsoft came to me and said, okay, we love the games, but what's next? And I said that I believe that music was next. And so I started something that eventually came to be called Tunes.com. And if you ever wanted to own a URL, that might be one you'd want to own, okay? And there came a wonderful day when Apple said, we think we should perhaps own that because it's confusingly close to what we want to call, the world's most successful music business. And I was a very happy camper. But what we did in the short term was, again, to go to all of the major publishers in the music space and partner with them rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. So Rolling Stone and Downbeat Jazz and The Source, I was able to go to them and say, look, you don't want to write these checks yourself. This is a very frothy new .com era. I know how to do this. Why don't you partner with me? And to this day, Jan Wenner sends me wonderful gifts and says, you saved me so many tens of millions of dollars, because I was arrogant to think I could do it myself, but thank God I didn't.
Publisher of Rolling Stone, just footnote for everybody.
Actually, yeah. So that was the music situation, and that ran up to about the end of the 90s. And then I did a series of turnarounds where, people would bring me in. One was a very large automotive company. One was a group of internet builders, 8 or 9 agencies that had been melded together to try and make sense out of those kinds of situations. And that was a different skill set. It's much different. But fixing something that's in distress is very much like a startup. It's not like managing. So it was a good use of my time. I saved about 900 or 1,000 jobs just in Atlanta alone. I had to fire the management, but I saved the folks' jobs. And then typically what would happen is I would turn these around and then sell them. And then at the beginning of the 2000s, I decided I was teaching and I was writing a couple of books, and I got involved and interested in education. And so then there was a decade that started with transforming and turning around Kendall College, which was a failing school after about 75 years. Picked it up, moved it from Evanston, where it had been, downtown, rebuilt it. In the middle, a school called Experientia, which was training 4th, 5th, and 6th graders to be scientists and entrepreneurs, which was very exciting. We built a whole city for them. We sold that just recently to the Girl Scouts. And interestingly enough, there's 85,000 Girl Scouts in the Chicagoland area who now take advantage of that city that we built. And then most recently, I partnered with Bob De Niro to build a digital media and film school called Tribeca Flashpoint Media Arts Academy, and ran that for about 6 years. Very exciting opportunity to get into high-end vocational training, which is being newly looked on with favor. It was very interesting to watch over this 5-year period how more and more parents figured out that sending their kid to a 4-year school where they would spend a ton of money, the kid wouldn't be interested in the first 2 years anyway, and then wouldn't get a job was not a good bet compared to 2 years at our school right into the job market and trained in digital skills that were really the going forward tools that you needed in this new world.
Yeah, I hear that's going to take off.
Yeah.
So are you
this
still
digital
involved?
stuff is catching?
I think
catching.
So. So are you still involved with Flashpoint Academy?
So I'm an owner, but I'm not actively involved. I hired a CEO. I sold the majority interest to a very large private equity firm, same ones I had sold actually Kendall College to. And I was sort of, for about 4 minutes, unemployed. Now, this has never worked out very well for my wife. So she immediately, gets rolling. In fact, that's how I got the job at the culinary school, which Kendall was. She figured meals were included, and she was tired of serving me 3 meals a day while I was sitting at home writing my book. So she signed me up for that job. But now I think that, so there was literally about a 4-minute window, and then we announced that after searching for about 9 months or almost a year, that I was going to take over this job.
It's Panorama on Rivet. I'm Charlie Myerson, talking to Howard Tullman, CEO of 1871, which is a co-working center for digital startups based in Chicago and on the web at 1871.com. It's not. It's the way you say it now in the 21st century, isn't it? You're number 89 on the latest Chicago Magazine list of most powerful Chicagoans. Is that about right, or should we have bumped off some people higher up or moved you down?
Well, I prefer, there's a different compilation called the Tech 50, and I think that in the last 3 years that aggregation of who are and I hate to say this, but who are the movers and shakers in the technology space in the city, there's only one person who's been on the list all 3 years, and it turns out to be me. Right. So I take a lot of pride in that because it's hard to keep ahead of that parade.
Absolutely.
And I think that Flashpoint and Experientia are two school businesses. Also, we're one of the only companies ever to win the Innovation Award, which is the Chicago Innovation Awards, 2 years in a row. So those are metrics that are significant. The Chicago Magazine magazine listing, I don't know what a fair number is. I mean, I'm happy to be included. I'm honored because it's good for 1871. Ram, is a close friend, and actually I was his landlord when he moved back to Chicago. Great story there, because if you remember, he couldn't move back into his house because he had leased it to some guy who wouldn't get out. So he lived in my loft. And,
gripping political drama as that unfolded.
Absolutely. So anyway, he wouldn't want to be anything other than number one, and so I think that I should cede that to him. But I'm hoping that as 1871 becomes 1871 2.0, and we start to move from this wonderful co-working convening space into what I like to call a startup factory, and we start building real businesses, even more than we already have, that will move up, because I expect to be a major part of the mayor's initiative, which is to create 20 to 30,000 new jobs in the technology sector in the next decade.
Even in Chicago, I think a lot of people don't know that A, 1871 is the year of the Great Chicago Fire, or B, that it is the name of this tech incubator space. How do you, for someone who's from out of the state, out of the country, who's never heard of 1871, how do you tell them what it is and what happens here?
Well, the interesting thing is that this is another one of these things, much like I said to you, that parents are a lot more comfortable sending their kids to a 2-year high-end school where they get trained and get a job than they used to be. When we used to talk about a convening space for the technology community and a co-working space 2 years ago, that was fairly novel. Now there are 280 of these spread across the country. None of them is as good as 1871, because most of them are real estate plays. This was never our objective. Our objective was to bring together the universities, the venture funds, the incubators, the accelerators, the members, the companies, the state, the city, and education. And so we have more mentoring and more education in the thousands of hours every month than any other incubator has. And I don't think they've figured out that that's the special sauce. You have to bring a lot more to it than simply saying we have the cheapest desks in town and things like that.
And now Chicago's going to be home to this new Digital Manufacturing and Design Innovation Institute. I think I've got that mouthful right.
I think that's a good description.
How does that how does that differ from 1871? How will you intersect or not?
We will. So first of all, the premise of basically digital manufacturing is really that digital technology and the connectivity of the internet, these are the two drivers, will permit us to re-envision the factory floor. So the best example that I can give you is 40% of the pieces of plastic that are in the inventory of a car dealership, it costs more to ship the piece of plastic to the dealership than the piece of plastic costs, okay?
Because it's coming from overseas in many cases.
Transportation costs. Now, when in the new world of 3D printing, we can literally have a machine that's this big, 2 feet high, and we can press a button and say, print out this piece because I need it now, and we will have no transportation costs. We'll have just-in-time inventory, and that's the vision. That's just one modest part of the vision, but the idea is the manufacturing floor will be cleaner, faster, will shrink transportation time, will increase the ability for design to really be, a massive consideration in terms of all of this. And the way we play into it is that our companies, we're trying to encourage more companies to be creating not simply digital products, but physical products as well. And design helps tremendously in that space.
Interesting question. So if this is, in the end, about jobs, both the work done at 1871 and the work done at the Digital Manufacturing Design Innovation Institute, I said it right, and yet the process you describe sounds so sterile, so free of human interaction. If you press a button and a machine does the work, where do the jobs come from?
Well, so there'll be different jobs. The interesting thing is Chicago has something like 80,000 jobs unfilled and probably 80,000 people unemployed. The problem is there's not a skills match. And what you learn when you go into manufacturing plants now is, one, we'd like them to be a lot cleaner, so we'll be doing light manufacturing. But three things have changed. First, we don't have the energy cost deficit that we used to have. We're getting pretty smart and pretty efficient about creating energy in the United States. So, this dependency on oil is almost over. That's number one. Number two, China is developing a middle class, and as a result, their wage, positioning is improving dramatically, and that's removing an advantage that they had in terms of labor cost. Okay, and then lastly, the truth is that every machine that we talk about is driven by computers. It has to be designed and operated by people, so they're just a different skill set of people. I like to talk about the fact that nobody under 35 will ever buy a car again, and I just gave that talk at the car show, so you can imagine how popular I was. But the reason is a lot of different things. First of all, exercise. Second of all, you can't buy a car if you're living in your parents' basement. Third, the ecology and the environmental issues. Four, we couldn't fix a car if our life depended on it. Five, if we opened the hood, we'd invalidate the warranty. So all of these things have distanced us from that connection that we used to have. It was it used to be patriotic. It was like see the USA in your Chevrolet.
I grew up in Detroit. If you didn't buy a new car every year, you weren't a good citizen.
And it's even more than that. The average age for getting your license now in the United States is 22 years old. We used to be there on the doorstep the night of our 16th birthday begging our parents, right? So sea change is really exciting in different ways, the ways we're going to relate to things that have historically been important parts of what goes on here. All that's changing.
You came to 1871 in January of 2014, pledging to shake things up, to shape up some of the companies that have been here incubating for a long time, or I believe you
up or out,
ship them out. Have you kicked anybody out yet? And if so, why? And what's happened?
So, when I started the film school, we had a choice. Because film students from affluent families are, to say that they have a sense of entitlement would be the most modest description that you could possibly say. Let's just say that they've been told since the beginning of time that they are exceptional and that they are the best of whatever it is that happens to be. There is no average, right? So we decided, from day one that we were going to be not their parents. We were going to save the strokes for their folks. We were going to be their first employer, and we were going to tell them the truth. And we thought that that was the best service that we could provide for them, because when they got out into the real world, they were going to need to do that. That's the idea that we're bringing here. If you have a crappy idea, basically you should go do something else, right? If you've been here a year and you're not making any progress, it's not that you're taking up space per se, it's that you're affecting the energy and sort of the success and all the vibe that we're trying to deal with here. So our view is this isn't a place, that's the YMCA. This isn't a charitable organization. It is a nonprofit, but the goal is to have throughput. And so I'm very proud that our first 26 companies that we just sort of graduated have created 300 jobs, raised $30 million, have a run rate in the aggregate of about $10 million. So these are real businesses. And now they're going off, and they'll be replaced by more and new startups as well. And we want to continue to have a connection to our alumni as well. So we're actually talking about expanding our space. But the idea of shaking things up is really more about, and I'm required to say this, that I'm building on the shoulders of giants, and so even a midget can be very successful, and everything I want before was perfect, and I'm just tweaking a little bit because I believe in iteration.
I see no fingers crossed, so I'll take you at your word there. You've talked about the successes that are leaving.
Sure.
Have you forced anybody out? Have you pushed any companies out?
You know what's very interesting? It's a biological process, so they don't leave. They reattach themselves to other opportunities. It couldn't be better. I mean, we have a case here where 3 different people from 2 other startups have all gone to work to one of the groups that's doing better. And so what a great system it is to be able to sort of walk around the kitchen and grab yourself another engineer or 2, and that's working, and that's the most exciting thing, is that we're not obliged to toss anybody out. It's actually a perfectly wonderful situation.
And you haven't tossed anybody out?
No, not so far.
It's Panorama on Rivet. Charlie Meyerson here on the 12th floor of the Merchandise Mart, talking to Howard Tolman, the CEO of 1871, co-working center for digital startups. I'm looking, we're in the lounge area, and I can see a lot of people. You can hear them in the background. Mostly guys.
It's about 15% women, but it's about 35% diverse.
Is that about as good as it can get?
Well, 50% of the world is women, so it's clearly not as good as it can get. I think that one of the things that I talk about all the time is wiki work, and wiki work means that we're no longer place constrained. We're no longer location based. Work can take place anywhere. And so I think that that's going to be a tool that's going to let us recapture retirees, stay-at-home moms, people with disabilities, all of these things. So it's not about this place per se, as much as it's about creating opportunities to assemble these workforces. And that's how we're going to bring more women. We just did a thing last week. We had 4 guys on a panel talking about women in IT, and we had 400 women in the audience. None of them were armed as far as we could determine, but it was a very interesting discussion, and we had the CIO of the city of Chicago. She introduced us, and some of it was very interesting. There's no question that there's some gender issues, and I would tell you that Dow Jones has just published a statistic that women-owned and operated startups are about twice as successful as the universe, the population of all businesses. We don't know why, but I mean that's something they've been able to document.
Is there a child care facility here?
We have a nursing space where the moms can nurse or pump, but there isn't a child care thing. That's a different set of financial and other kinds of liabilities, and we're really not equipped to do that. And honestly, you don't really want to bring your kid. I mean, you could live next door, and that could be an issue, but you really don't want to bring your kid on your commute. It's a different situation, and so most child care occurs within 6 blocks of someone's home in the United States, and we think that that's not something that we bring anything to, and in fact, I think we would do a lousy job of that.
You could try.
My kids are grown. I'd never want to do it again.
This field is getting more crowded. This startup, this hub concept, right next door to 1871, a new health tech incubator called Matter is gearing up in Chicago. How's that going to play with 1871?
Well, so we have 5 areas. Health IT is one, and that's what Matter is. But in the space between 1871 and Matter is another 25,000 square feet, and we expect to be opening that space relatively soon to do incubators around education technology, financial services technology, hospitality, and what we call Femtech, which will literally be a cluster of women-owned and women-operated businesses. And the 5th is the Internet of Things, which will be a partnership with Cisco. So we expect that all of those verticals, those clusters, now it turns out that it's great to have 240 different companies in our space, but it's more valuable to have 15 education companies sitting in proximity to each other, because it turns out that only 1 or 2 of them will ever be competitive, but they can all be mutually supportive and collaborative. And so that synergy is something we want to engineer.
So 1871 and Matter, are you in any way competitive?
No.
Absolutely collaborative?
Right.
Collaborative?
Right.
Okay.
And frankly, the other thing you should understand is Matter is a feeder for the Illinois Medical District. One of the big issues was why would they put Matter here if all the docs and all the hospitals and everything else were over there? Turns out nobody wanted to go over there.
On the near west side.
Right, on the near west side. But the plan is that as companies mature within Matter, they will in fact go there. And that's why the state and the city were big proponents of Matter being here. And I would also say, that the Matter people aren't stupid. And here you have an enormous community with a lot of resources that they won't have to replicate or duplicate.
How does all this translate back into Chicago's future? Well, and look a few years ahead. 1871, Matter, the new manufacturing hub. What do you see for Chicago in the next decade, and how do all these things come into play?
Well, first of all, you would think I would hesitate in answering that, right?
No, not at all. I know you well enough.
So first of all, by 2020, 43% of the U.S. population will be freelance workers. That's a huge change. They need support. They need resources. So places like this, by definition, will be more prevalent, and we want to be sure that we're doing the absolute best job of that. But shared workspace. Starbucks really started this. I mean, Howard Schultz was a friend and a tenant of mine when Starbucks first began.
Who hasn't been a tenant of yours?
It's frightening.
Never rented property.
It is frightening, and I don't think of myself as a real estate guy, but in any event, Howard understood that there was a third place, and the third place in most cities, even to this day, is the closest Starbucks. That's where you go for the 20 minutes before your meeting, after your next meeting, whatever it is, right? So he understood that. McDonald's, I always love this, it took him about 25 years to convert from eat and get out to, hey, stay a while, right? Yeah. And so now we're working with McDonald's on trying to put some content on all those monitors that are in the McDonald's things, because they have this horrible problem. About a third of those franchisees invested in the equipment, but they're running CNN or they're running Dish or something like that, which has unfortunately, competitive advertising on it, and also not the most appetizing news, day in and day out. So very interesting new content networks being created in all kinds of different areas. But so number one is a huge freelance population. Number two is the idea that the sharing economy is just beginning to explode. And, we're the biggest city, I think, now for Divvy, and Divvy is a perfect model.
Bike sharing system in Chicago.
Perfect model for a resource that these next two generations, the two things that I would tell you is ownership is nowhere near as valuable or desirable as the experience. So it's not about owning anything. So Divvy and sharing and shared everything is a very efficient and economical solution. And then number two, it's all about utility, not possession. It's like, I want to use it exactly for this 20 minutes, and the wear and tear, the maintenance, and everything else, if I can lay that off on somebody else, or 10 of us can share that in the course of a day, it's a huge model for a new kind of efficiency and series of economies.
You're describing communism.
Well, I'm describing sharing, but not necessarily the economic products of my labors, which would be, Marxism or communism. I'm really describing a new idea that's more economical, more, really environmentally responsible. And I'm excited because, of all things, for the Divvy people, just to give you an idea, so last night I designed this thing. Something like 40% of the people that come to O'Hare Airport never leave the airport, so they don't really get to see the city. So what I've designed is 4 Divvy bikes that'll be stationary, and while you're killing, an hour and a half at the airport, you'll sit on the Divvy bike and you'll pedal, and that will power this monitor, and then you'll get to take a Divvy trip that will actually photograph on the handlebars of a bike. So if you want to go from the Mart to Wrigley Field, we'll show you the path, and so you'll be sitting there. This has existed in health clubs before, but to link it to Chicago and give you a chance in your downtime at the airport to explore all the different parts of Chicago is pretty exciting.
So is this a thing? Is this going to happen?
Yeah, it's going to happen.
What's the timetable?
Well, the Divvy bikes here will be installed within the next 90 days. We'll be announcing this in a week or so. All of our members will get a free Divvy membership, and then we'll do the O'Hare project. I have to shoot those videos, but I'd say by the end of the year.
Is that going to come with deodorant for the people at the airport who get on the bikes? And
it's pretty modest pedaling. It's not. There's no hills when you're in a stationary bike.
What else can we expect from 1871 in the months ahead?
I think that we're going to see some breakout companies. I think that people don't understand that our average age here is not an 18-year-old kid who decided not to go to college, but it's a 40-plus-year-old person who is quite serious about what they're building. It's somebody with an advanced degree, not simply even a BA, but an advanced degree. Huge number of those folks. People who are building B2B businesses, new machines, all kinds of different things. And honestly, speed. Speed is what we want to be associated with us, because I was meeting with the guy who founded the Chicago Mercantile Exchange yesterday, and he asked me about IP, intellectual property protection. And I said, in this day and age, not only can't you afford to pay the lawyers to do this completely futile thing of filing all the paperwork, and then it comes back and, somebody claimed that he invented oxygen, and now you have to defend whatever it is you're doing. So what we say is that the only defense is speed and iteration, and that's going to be the watchwords of what's going on here, and that's what you should expect from us. Innovation, rapid change, iteration, and growth.
Does 1871 have a future beyond Chicago? Do we see franchises in other cities?
I don't really see franchises. There's this concept called Chicago-ness, which we really think, and I just wrote today a blog post for my column in Inc. About situational ethics. It's really interesting, and it's like, this next generation may not get that our word is our bond actually means something if you grew up in the pits at Chicago, where when you made a trade, you honored that trade, or you just weren't there anymore. So we like that we have come together here at a time where there's new energy. We have new governance in terms of the mayor. We have a governor who's trying to do things and making really hard decisions, and it's not easy. I mean, I don't envy Pat Quinn any of the hard decisions he has to make, but at least he's an honest guy who's trying. So I'm very encouraged about where we're headed, and I don't think it translates. A perfect example is, we also have something in Chicago started by a couple of really smart folks called Built in Chicago. It's turned out to be, 17 or 18,000, maybe even more members. And it was a blogging media connection thing, but it's morphed into a very valuable job board where, the tech community goes to connect. Now, they've successfully extended that to Built in Colorado, but built in LA, built in, 6 or 7 other cities? I don't think so. I think it's going to be very problematic because we had such a connection of enormous, wonderful circumstances here that permitted us to be as successful as 1871 has been, but also the city is really on a new trajectory.
So yay, Chicago.
So let me just say, and I didn't want to take issue with you when you started with your prologue, but one of the reasons that we say yay, Chicago is we're not a one-horse town. So the Sandberg description of the city of Big Shoulders, what's interesting about it is we have 6 or 7 major industries, none of which represents more than, say, 15% of the economy. If there's a downturn in the entertainment industry, you wouldn't want to be in the entire West Coast. If fashion or media has a hiccup, you wouldn't want to be in New York. Chicago is stable, a great place to live, a great place to raise a family, and of course to start your business in 1871 and to build it in the city of Chicago.
We at Rivet could not agree more. Our guest on Panorama, recorded March 6th, 2014, has been the CEO of Chicago's 1871 Digital Startup Center. For more on 1871, tap the headline. And to hear more Panorama interviews, including visits with 2 others on Chicago Magazine's Power 100 list, number 1, Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, number 73, Chris Kennedy, tap the magnifying glass, then search for Panorama. That's Panorama. I'm Charlie Meyerson. You're listening to Rivet.